Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Kayla Williams. She's the CISO over at Devo. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Thanks for being here. Could you give our audience some background on yourself and your career?
Yeah, I have a non-traditional path into cybersecurity. I graduated with my bachelor's in accounting and a master's in management with the intent of being a CPA, and did my 2 years of external auditing and didn't like it. Moved into internal auditing, which there is a difference, and did that for about 3 years and had an opportunity to move into security consulting at the financial services company I worked for. And that is where I got, my first taste of cybersecurity. And I got to travel to England for a year and grow and develop my skill set. I had a really supportive leadership team there. Moved into more of a GRC. Now it would be called GRC. At the time, it was just straight risk management. And then left and became the director of GRC at a SaaS company. And I did that for a few years. And now I came over to Devo as the VP of GRC and got promoted up into CISO about a little over 2 years ago.
Very cool. So it seems like you've kind of risen through the ranks of GRC. It's interesting because there's been a lot of chatter on LinkedIn recently about whether or not a CISO needs to be quote unquote technical. Does somebody need to come through more of the security operations type background or application security or pen testing, something like that? Or, can they come from more of the GRC background? Obviously you're in the CISO seat, so, you're living proof that it can be done. What's your take on that debate?
Yeah, it's on Twitter too. And I'm silently observing. It's really interesting to see how passionate people are about their roles and the roles of their leaders. I think that being a GRC professional gives you a ability to speak to the business in ways that some overly technical people can have a hard time understanding. So I think there is an advantage to being a GRC or security risk minded CISO. I look at risk holistically about how it impacts not just the technology stack, but also brand, reputation, customers, financial teams. And that gives me ability to translate those risks into actionable items for those different functional departments. And I can more closely align to their expectations and their roadmaps and what they're doing and kind of navigate those pathways a bit differently than I've seen even my old former leaders who are very, very technical. I've seen them fail or struggle in those areas. So I do think it's a growing set of CISOs out there that are coming up that path. GRC isn't going away anytime soon with technical privacy laws changing constantly. New reporting requirements from legal and regulatory bodies who don't fully understand what they're actually asking for, as we all know. And having the skill sets that GRC brings in and having the ability to understand risk and process is definitely going to be more value add than not.
Yeah, agree. And it's interesting too that you came from the consulting background. I assume that's probably served you very well over the years as well. Having that, client-facing ability and always having kind of a customer-focused mindset, where you may have internal customers now versus external customers, but I'd imagine a lot of those skills transfer, which I think we're going to talk a lot about probably in this conversation: transferable skills, non-traditional backgrounds, that sort of thing. And I'm a huge believer in keeping an open mind as far as who might be a fit for the security field, which I'm sure we can get into. But I guess to kind of move in that direction, we usually start off the show by exploring the idea of the talent gap itself. So would you say that the talent gap is a real thing? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I would say the talent gap is a real thing, but it's something that we've created ourselves. In a lot of cases, we put up a lot of roadblocks to moving into the security field, but you can see it in LinkedIn, you can see it in posts on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and Mastodon, where there are people who are like, you have to have this particular background and you have to have, X number of years doing these particular things because I did, therefore you must. And I think that's a real detriment to the field in most cases because you're limiting the diversity of thought. There are a lot of really talented, dedicated people out there who, aren't in the technology field, that are in adjacent fields with similar complementary skill sets that can come in and really make a difference. I personally feel that technology and information security can be taught, where having critical thinking skills and the attention to detail, or the EQ and the ability to negotiate and partner with and collaborate with your peers is something that you have inherently in you. And I feel that our industry has done itself a disservice by discounting those types of skill sets that are out there that would be value add exponentially to our teams.
Yeah, I tend to think that a lot of the things that make people the best possible security professionals aren't something that you put on a job description, because it's not something you can assess on somebody's resume. Does this person have strong pattern recognition ability? Are they intelligent? Are they highly motivated? Are they intellectually curious? All of these things that you could put it on a job description, but you wouldn't be able to evaluate it on somebody's resume usually. And you can kind of get indicators, and we've talked about that in previous episodes, maybe looking for people that have a bunch of passion projects on the resume, that sort of thing. But ultimately, you can't necessarily assess a lot of these things, I think, until you actually speak to somebody on the phone. The problem we have right now is there's, especially when you look at the entry level hiring sort of market, it's extremely competitive. And there's, I would put the number at 10,000 people at least trying to break into the security industry right now. So there are a lot of people, I think, that have those intangible skills and traits that everybody is looking for, but there's just not enough jobs in which for them to land. Any thoughts on what we can do with all those folks that are looking for their first shot, I guess, right now?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of internships. I think not free. I don't think anyone should ever work for free. I don't think macroeconomically we can afford to have anybody working for free these days. But I think having college students or high school students who are interested in learning, give them the opportunity to. They need, the joke now is like, oh, you have an entry level position with 10 years of experience to get the entry level. We have to stop that. We have to give people experience. Technology is changing way too fast. Our threats are evolving constantly. The landscape's getting much more intricate. We need people who are interested in learning to come on board and help. And I know it can be expensive sometimes to get a full-blown internship program up and running and that is being managed appropriately. But if you as a leader know, hey, you know what, I need bodies to have eyes on glass, or to do the administrative side of like the GRC roles or the technical privacy roles, create those one or two places, roles in those places that you need them, and bring them on. If they're in school or if they're working another job and they can be part-time, you don't have to worry about the costs there necessarily. And it's giving them that experience that they need to get into the field. I am a strong advocate for schools now, and you see it more than I think when we were younger, having technology classes. Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, they have the badges now for STEM and for cyber, and there are other ways to get the hands-on experience through training modules and things like that. But we have to be better at knocking down those barriers because they're artificially created by us. And I think as hiring managers and as executives, we have an obligation to be training and bringing up the next generation of people who are going to come in and, replace us as we start to age out. We need to have the talent there. So I do think it's an obligation on all of us to do better in that area.
Absolutely. And you brought up one thing that most people don't really talk about. It's the idea of having somebody on your team part time. That's really a low cost way to kind of quote unquote try before you buy that nobody really seems to consider. It's not like having an intern that you need to look over their shoulder, 40 hours a week for a period of 3 months. It's somebody that can come in off hours, maybe shore up documentation. There's a million different little responsibilities you could give to somebody on a part-time basis that wouldn't be such a huge commitment and really, I guess, time suck for the more senior people on the team. I think that's a lot of the resistance that we see. It's this idea that, okay, if we have a hole on our team, we have X, Y, and Z skills that we absolutely must fill in some sort of way. And the only way really to do that is to go out to the market and find somebody with those skills. And chances are that person's not going to be junior. So in that case, maybe your people are already kind of overworked and they're working a ton of hours. They have a lot of responsibility already. There's a gap on the team. How can you kind of justify hiring that more junior person? Any thoughts on how we might remedy that, relatively common situation?
Yeah, I think affording people the ability to work, it doesn't have to be the 40, 60-hour work weeks. And I do think we need to do a better job at bringing in part-time people, off-hours people. We always hear about the SOC or the NOC having the 24/7 follow the sun model. You can have a follow the sun model with part-time employees, maybe not 24/7, but you can still do the follow the sun in other regions where you operate with part-time employees that are just bridging this gap and completing work that your more senior people don't have time to do, or, there are people that have the mentality of, oh, it's beneath me, I shouldn't have to do that, and feeling, don't say it's right, but it's out there. And I think it's a great opportunity to get training for people who, maybe they're not going to be brought on full time someday, but you're fulfilling a purpose for them. They're fulfilling a purpose for you. So I think it's a win-win. And it's, like you said, it's lower costs. You're not having to pay for the insurances and maybe the 401k contributions and things like that. So it's another mechanism that we can utilize to fix this gap that we're seeing in our field.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you had much experience in your consulting days with the campus recruiting aspect of what some of the consulting firms do. Of any companies out there, they seem to be, in my experience, the most effective at building these formal campus recruiting programs that really, it's like a very formalized pipeline to get somebody from college into that, first year associate type of role. Did you have any exposure to that sort of thing during your consulting days?
Not when I was in security consulting, but I actually got recruited into my first accounting job that way for an external auditing firm, was through the people coming to my college campus, doing the career fair there and getting the opportunity to speak to them and give them my resume. But I absolutely think it's vital for companies to show up at college campuses, especially, I'm in Boston, so there's so many schools here, wonderful, top of the line universities that are here, but there's also community colleges in this neighborhood as well, that we can go to, and we can have a table set up and talk to people and get the company's name. Just get your company name out there. That way, if there ever is a job opening, I recognize that. Where do I know that name from? And you get that brand recognition from a hiring perspective as well for later on. I think that is another underutilized resource, is along with the internship piece or part-time, going to college campuses and spreading the word for your company and getting the recognition is very important too.
Yeah, I think we need to do, as an industry, a better job of just getting in front of the candidates that we know are going to be basically put through all these programs that exist. I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. There's a lot of financial incentive for the certification companies and colleges and boot camps to just keep churning out all these candidates. And we already have a ton of candidates on the market. And if it just keeps happening, it's either we find something to do with all these folks or what. I guess they could possibly go to IT or, find another industry to go into. But I think we have a ton of people that could be a fit for the industry that just aren't getting that first shot. So, and I know for myself, I'm on a bunch of Discord channels. There's a ton of subreddits out there. There's all these different places that these potential really strong, potentially future senior candidates, hang out and talk about security and show what they're working on in their home lab and stuff like that. Any advice for the hiring managers out there who might be interested in getting in front of more of these passionate people that maybe they are the cream of the crop for that, proliferation of entry level folks?
Yeah, as hiring managers, I think we have to do a better job all around. We can't just throw job descriptions at our recruiting teams and say, okay, go. We have to train the recruiters on what we want them to look for. Every role is different. What you need from a leader versus an entry level is going to be different. And we have an obligation to make sure that we are very clear with what actually is a requirement versus a nice to have. So is a bachelor's degree really a requirement for a job where they're just following playbooks all day and clicking buttons and eyes on screen? Maybe not. So I really feel as like line managers, we have to do a better job from the get-go and review our job descriptions, make sure that they are accurately reflective of the skills that we need. And that will translate into having better candidates that will apply, or at least a more diverse amount of candidates that can apply. Because I know we've talked about before about like the statistics. Oh, if a woman doesn't check every single box on a job description, they won't apply. Well, if that's something that's known, let's do something about it. Let's fix that and like put the things on there that really are needed. Are bachelor's degrees needed for jobs? Some, sure. Maybe not all of them. Do I want my dentist to have never gone to dental school? No, I don't. But in my field, in our field, I mean, it's not necessarily always needed because there are these people that are out there that have these passion projects on the side. Put that on there. Like, are you into cool things? Do you have a home lab? Are you experimenting with new ways to build things? Put it on the job description. Draw those people in. Make it seem, well, I will not make it seem, but make it more appealing to different candidates with different skill sets. There's a lot of talk and research going on right now about the neurodiversity that's in our field. So we recognize that folks that tend to be in our field have some have neurodiversity. Okay, let's appeal to that then. Let's make sure that we are able to write job descriptions that are welcoming to all types of people with all different types of backgrounds, all different skill sets and passions. And let's focus on how to bring them in and address the talent gap that we're seeing. I really feel that we, as hiring managers and companies, can do so much better at this problem because it starts with us. If we don't know what we want, how are we going to get it?
Yeah, and I think sometimes hiring managers will default to just kind of putting on a job description the first few things that come to mind. Well, it would be nice if they had, 5 years of experience in incident response, and it'd be nice if they had their GCIH. And but I don't think a lot of people, and the reason I say this is because all of these requirements end up on the job description. So, but like you said, if you actually think about some of these requirements, they don't necessarily speak to somebody's ability to do the job. It's just we're looking for some sort of proxy for ability to do a job, and we default to these things like degrees or certifications or years of experience doing X, Y, and Z, or experience with a specific tool, when in reality, if somebody's familiar with a similar tool, they could pick up that other tool that's, in your environment very quickly if they're, intelligent enough and stuff like that. So I think the single best way to make those more open and welcoming job descriptions is just keep that list of requirements super small. Like, really think about why you have each requirement. Why is it that you want 5 years of experience? Well, if you think about that, maybe it's because you think, okay, well, 5 years of experience means that they've probably had more exposure to X, Y, and Z thing. Okay, well, really, that's what you're looking for then. It's not the 5 years of experience. So you have to kind of break down these things and really think a little bit more deeply about what it is, and be willing to fill in some gaps. One thing I see as an external recruiter, I'm usually brought in when a company is struggling to hire somebody. In a lot of cases, it's because the requirements are extremely hard to fill, and there may not even be somebody in the U.S. that has all the requirements they're looking for. Or if somebody does exist, there might be 5 or 10, and there's no guarantee you're going to be able to get somebody with that exact combination of experience. So the more you broaden your candidate pool, as you were saying, starting with the job description, but then also educating your recruiters, really think about what are different ways that we can broaden this candidate pool as wide as humanly possible, so that we can better look for those intangibles that, is going to make somebody a better fit really long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. So what about you mentioned a little bit about your relationship with recruiters, and really making sure that they're educated on what you need and why. How have you found that relationship? Like, has it been generally a pretty positive experience for you? And how do you ensure that they're screening, I guess, for some of those intangibles that you're looking for?
Yeah. Overall, it's been really good. Because I do my homework. I review the job description. I do all the things that we just discussed, and making sure that the things that are listed are things that are actually must-haves, not just nice-to-haves. But with the recruiters, ask the questions. If your hiring manager isn't good about telling you what they need, ask them. Make sure that, you understand why when you're talking to the candidate. Like, why are you interested in this job is always a simple question, but why are you passionate about this? Why do you want this particular role? And of course, you see the things online now. It's like, well, I want this role because I need a job. Like, I want money. That's the typical, and when I've been asked a question, I think the same thing too, but why are you transitioning into information security? What about this? Like I think you mentioned it before, intellectual curiosity is something that I always try to weed out in my questioning to find out, are you reading things on the side? Do you have a passion project? Are you trying to learn more? I think that's a skill set that people have or they don't have. They either are I go to job 9 to 5, that's it, or they're doing things on their own. Find ways for recruiters to ask those questions, because those aren't going to be necessarily in everyone's resume in a separate section. I don't think I list the books I've read in mine, so I think as line managers are responsible for ensuring they can tell the recruiters what kind of skill sets they're looking for and other complementary skills, and how to weed them out. But then the recruiters need to ask the right questions, and it's not those I think those pieces of paper that are the standard. Make sure you ask them how they would handle a conflict. Ask them how they do this. It's not just that. There's a lot more you can glean from people just from having a simple conversation. You can pick up on personality types and passions and things like that. I actually did a presentation back in August at Blue TeamCon in August this past year on the non-traditional paths into cybersecurity, and I did a whole section on the responsibilities of the hiring manager and the recruiter, and then I drew a mind map of complementary skills that you can find. And one of my favorite stories is when a friend of mine was recruiting for an incident response manager. They found a inner city bus driver who was perfect for the job because they knew how to write incident reports. They knew how to keep themselves calm in perilous situations. They had unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they had those situations where they had to remain calm, de-escalate situations, critically think about, not just their own safety, but the people around them. And I think the de-escalation piece is very important in our job, because people incident, and being able to stay cool, calm, and collected in a moment like that is a complementary skill set that if you don't ask the right questions and you just see a candidate who's applied and you're like, you're a bus driver, why are you applying for this job? You're going to miss that. You're going to say, oh, next. But there's a reason why that candidate was really good for this role and they got the job and they've done great. You can learn security. You can go to courses. You can take free courses. You can do homework on your own and learn the skill. But having these other, I don't want to say silent skill sets, but these things that maybe don't come through necessarily on paper, we as an industry are missing out on some really talented people that can contribute to what we're looking for.
That's really interesting. I love to hear those stories about folks that you normally wouldn't consider. There's so many transferable skills out there. One of my previous guests mentioned he hired a guy that had previously run a World of Warcraft guild, and he saw that as really impressive because he could coordinate with a bunch of hormonal teenagers, and that was a skill set that you can't really teach. It's just something somebody kind of picks up and has a knack for.
Yeah, that's great.
From a process standpoint, though, it's like, in theory, I think we'd all love to hire as many non-traditional candidates as humanly possible in theory. But in practice, your recruiter is tasked with finding a certain baseline set of skills in the beginning. How do you decide what baseline set of skills you need for a given role and then kind of fill in the rest later?
Yeah, I think that goes back to making sure the job description is exactly what you're looking for. It doesn't have the extra fluff. If you make the job appealing to that broader audience, you're going to have a bigger pool of candidates to choose from. And then saying, to the recruiter, okay, like this person is going to be working with, a diverse group of executives, managing up, managing across, managing down. These skill sets, they need to have, time management, organizational skills, the things that we typically hear of. But then above and beyond that, they're going to need to have X, Y, and Z. Ask them about situations like where they've had to deal with this, or if they're telling you about, I think as a recruiter, if someone's telling you about experiences they've had in a conversation, poke at it. Ask those questions. If as a line manager, if you are very clear about what you're looking for, recruiters, that's their job. They know how to go out there and get this information. So let them, and just make sure it's very clear. Like, hey, I don't care, or I do care about this thing. I'm really looking for this over that, and just have the continuous feedback and follow up with your recruiter. Hiring people is very expensive. It is a full-time job as a manager to go through, for however long it is, the candidates that your recruiters are giving to you, making sure that you are happy with the people that you're seeing. You have to contribute as well. It's not just over the fencing it to HR or to a talent agency and being like, okay, let me know who you pick. You have to be engaged.
Yeah, totally agree. And I always say, if you spend just a little bit of time on the front end, it's going to save you so much time on the back end. It's an investment that's of your time that's going to pay dividends in the long run. It's hard to do too much. I think preparation, working with the recruiters, telling a story about that candidate, kind of in your own words, actually hopping on an audio or a video call and speaking about that person versus, just sending emails back and forth. So much about when I start a search looking for somebody, I'll make sure that I speak with the hiring manager and recite back to them in my own words what I think that candidate might look like. And I just kind of weave a tale of what I think the ideal person might look like. And if you ask your recruiter to do that and they give you something back that isn't what you're looking for, it's a way for you to correct before they get started. And you'll save more time on the back end, not interviewing and weeding out people that could have been screened on the front end. So that's a great point. What about the interview process? I think that's where a lot of companies really get caught up when they're especially selective about who they're hiring, and they want to hire the best of the best, but they might have 6 rounds of interviews, or they may struggle to schedule that second round, and so it drags out for another 2 or 3 weeks. What's been your experience and best practices, I guess, as far as getting people through the process?
I personally do not like the extended 8-week engagement where I wouldn't say you're stringing along a candidate, but if someone is interested in working for you, and as an organization, you can't even get your act together to have people come in and interview, in a short amount of time, it shows disorganization. It doesn't give the impression of, okay, I'm really interested in this person. I'm a good company to work for because I know what I'm doing. So, well, it might be frustrating as a line manager to not get a candidate in. As a candidate, you're like, okay, what's going on? And it's just a bad look. I think the more senior you become, there's going to be more requirements for those different level of interviews. If you're hiring someone as an entry level or an admin one, like or whatever the title might be, on the lower end of the seniority ladder, there's no reason there needs to be 4 or 5 interviews. If your organization requires it for some reason, pair people up together and cut down that cycle. Here in the States, it's like a 2-week notice that's required, not where abroad where it's like a month, 3 months for this, I'm going to resign now, like that leave period. So be courteous of their time. If they're actively looking for a job, they're trying to make it work through their work day to come and interview with you. Be respectful of their time. Because it doesn't make you look good if you're not being courteous. Same with candidates. If you're coming to an interview, be prepared. Don't just just show up and not have questions in mind that you want to ask. Everyone asks the standards about like benefits and things like that, but other questions about the role itself or the culture of the company, it's a two-way street. An interview is not just you interviewing as a company, interviewing the person for the role. That person's also interviewing you, and you want to make a good impression. With things like, was it Blind, the app Blind, with Glassdoor, this industry is very small. People talk. So you want to make a good impression on both ends of a recruitment engagement. So.
Yeah, in my experience, process is everything, especially when you're looking to hire quote unquote unicorns. I think there's a lot of folks that they want to make sure that they're not making the wrong hiring decision, because the wrong hiring decision can be so costly. And so I think that idea is what drives a lot of the extra interview rounds and extra due diligence and things like that. I tend to favor the idea, and I've made a lot of really long-term career matches over my years. We're talking, at this point, almost a decade. I've had some people sticking around with the same company that I placed. So I think it can be done with brief and fast interview processes. I really do. Efficient interview processes. The challenge is, how do you ensure that you're asking all of the right questions in that interview process to really get to know somebody well enough in that relatively short amount of time? Any thoughts on that? How we can really ask the tough questions we need to in the interview process and select, which ones those are?
That, I think, goes back to the relationship between the hiring manager and the recruiter, making sure that there is a clear understanding of, as we mentioned before, like what are the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves, knowing the tangible versus intangible skill sets that you're looking for, and having a conversation. I am not a fan of walking into an interview with those printouts from the HR team that, they get them from a bank of questions and like, okay, you have to ask about this and that. And it's like, no, I don't operate that way as a line manager. I don't micromanage. So I'm going to have a conversation and try to get out what I can. I think a half an hour is too short to assess somebody's personality. I think even 45 minutes might be too short, but going on an hour for a lower level position might be a bit too much. So I think like 45 minutes is a sweet spot. Have a conversation. Ask them not just about work-related items. Ask them about what they're up to. Like, what do you do on the weekends? Like, have a flowing, natural conversation with the person, and you're going to get to see another side of them. What are they going to bring to your team from like a social aspect, a cultural aspect? That is so important. For me, when I've been interviewing candidates, when I've been asked about culture, I like to be honest and say, this is what I expect of the people in my team. Is it always like sunshine and rainbows? No, being in security is a very difficult job. You're constantly having to negotiate and do the hearts and mind campaigns with people. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is important work, and the culture of the company appreciates it. And I ask questions about how they've had to do that as well to understand, what's been their experience with pushback. Right. I think being in security, we all can say, oh, yeah, I have a roadmap, engineering and product. They all agreed to it. Come time to do it. No resources available. You have to be able to negotiate and not be afraid to say, hey, look, like this is how it ties to the corporate goals and what that looks like for a person. In their roles or even their personal life. Like camp counselor, they had to negotiate with a kid who's been having a really bad day, who's doing something wrong. Like there's a lot of other ways you can find out if people have the ability to meet the soft skills that you need to be successful in a role. Technical skills, in my opinion, can be taught. So
yeah, and that's a great point you mentioned about being honest, I guess, and transparent about the issues that the team might face as well. I think that's a key component of making those long-term career matches. You're not just painting this overly rosy picture where everything sounds amazing and then they get in the job and they discover what the challenges actually are and they're like, oh crap, I wasn't prepared for this. That's how you end up getting attrition. If you set expectations in the beginning, you ask those tough questions, you run the good, the bad, and the ugly past the candidates in the interview process. One, they appreciate the transparency. And two, you're more likely to get somebody who's the most ideal fit all the way through the process. And you'll inherently kind of weed out the folks that aren't committed to getting through those challenges with you, despite all the good things about your company and your team specifically. So yeah, I love that. What about there's a lot of talk about neurodiversity, and you kind of mentioned it there. One thing I think that sometimes companies struggle with is hiring somebody who may be neurodiverse, which kind of leads them to not necessarily have what we might think of as like the best communication skills, because they just, they think differently, they operate differently. They may not be as polished as another candidate. How do you hire somebody like that versus, having the expectation for EQ and communication skills and stuff like that? Like, how can you build the case to hire somebody like that who may contribute to the culture of your team in diversity of thought, but they don't necessarily have the quote unquote, communication skills that you're looking for?
Yeah, as a hiring manager, it's my job to make sure that I am looking at what a candidate can bring to the table for my team, from my customers, my roadmap. Like I have to look at it at a holistic view. And also as a line manager, it is my responsibility. I am accountable for making sure that every person on my team is able to be themselves. And I think there's been more of a shift in that direction. I think as I say, the old guard starts to leave the industry, where there's more tolerance for folks that would typically be considered different. I make sure that I understand my team. I understand how they communicate, what their communication style is. Do they need me to have a one-to-one with them, be very precise on the tasks that they have to do, and then send a follow-up email? Or can we just have like a conversation over Slack? Is that how they prefer to communicate? And it's my job to make sure that I'm able to give them what they need because they work for me at my company. So I try to always go out of my way to make sure that I am cognizant of how I can speak to people, how I can work with them, and try to overcome any challenges that they might have. I try to make a two-way street of a conversation. Like I want people to feel comfortable to talk to me, where I can feel comfortable going and talking to them, especially if it's something I need them to do, or they're not doing something and I have to raise it. I understand that not everybody, that's a skill set, right? Not everybody has that ability to communicate in that manner or want to, right? Like, oh, that's going out. I don't want to do that. Like, I'm just going to be me. Okay, that's you. But I don't think that's what the leader of the future looks like. I think that is going to be very limiting for people. down the line as they start to bring in people. If there's a leader that has a lot of attrition on their team, look at why that may be, because it could be down to having neurodiverse people on their teams, or even just people who have certain, as they say, quirks, but maybe don't classify as neurodiverse, and they don't want to bend, as they say, and learn how to communicate better as a leader. It is a leader's job to lead. It's a manager's job to be task oriented and do this, do that, do this, do that. But leaders, it's a very different skill set. And if you're hiring people who are diverse, you need to know how to work with people who are diverse. And that takes time. You have to learn. You have to want to do better. So I always try to do better because I want to bring in people and I learn from everybody. And I think it's just a great opportunity. So for me, I don't look at, necessarily their appearance, how they show up to meetings. I work in SaaS, so it's a bit different. But if they're not going in front of customers, they're not going in front of the board, they're at home, because I don't think you should go back into the office if you don't have to. I don't care. Just do your job. If you have a problem, come to me. Let's talk about it. Let's work it out. It's the employer-employee relationship is a two-way street. So I think it's really important to make sure that you are cognizant of how you can make that relationship work. And sometimes it doesn't, right? So.
Yeah, well, that's a good point to bring up too. How do you decide when it's time to part ways with somebody on your team? When have you exhausted what you're able to do as far as mentoring that person and leading them and setting expectations and setting goals and things like that and motivating that person? How do you determine that cutoff point where it's just not a good fit for the longer term?
Firstly, you have to speak to your HR team, because every company's threshold, if you will, is a bit different on what the requirements are. But for me, I had one employee where, unfortunately, they got put on a PIP. They didn't report to me directly, but they were put on a PIP, and they knocked it out of the park. They went above and beyond what we asked them, because they didn't realize until they saw it, and they're like, oh, okay. Went above and beyond and came off that PIP and were fantastic. They just kind of needed one of those moments, the getting shook on your shoulders. And I had never seen that before. So that was a pleasant surprise. So I think as a hiring manager, a line manager, if you're communicating, if things are getting put in writing, they have goals and objectives that they're not meeting, and you have the evidence to demonstrate that, put this individual on a PIP or whatever the equivalent is at your company, have the conversation, and have the real conversation. Don't pussyfoot around the problem. Say, listen, this is the feedback I've gotten. This is what I'm seeing. What are your thoughts here? Ask them. Maybe there is something going on, because everyone has something going on, and how they react is different per person. And that's where the EQ kind of comes in as a leader, and say, okay, look, these are the expectations right now for you to, shape up, prove yourself, let's work together. Here's how you can do it. I want, every Friday, I want a status report. I want to be copied on emails that have to do with this particular project, whatever it might be. If the person wants to stay, if the person has the skill set for the role that they're in, and they've told you, yeah, I can do this job, or they've said, I'm in over my head, which can absolutely happen as well, work with them. If someone's in over their head and their skill set, their complementary skill sets aren't working, or they're in too senior of a role, or as a line manager, it's your responsibility then to go to HR and say, is there any way we can transfer them to in the company? It's cheaper to transfer someone to another department than it is to let them go and then hire somebody else. So work with your HR team, figure out where they can go. You're doing them a favor by putting them in a job where they might succeed, versus, having to bring someone else in later. So I think just have the conversation and give people the opportunity to prove themselves. If they don't want to, it's going to be very clear that they don't want to. And then you have your answer.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you give them a chance by bringing this up to make a change. And I can imagine in most cases it probably doesn't go that way, and the person
Mhm.
just kind of continues on the same trajectory, and then eventually they're out the door. Um, but that's interesting that that person didn't realize that there was a problem, which kind of goes back to expectation setting. If the expectations are clear in the beginning, then you can always refer back to that and say, when we first brought you on, this is what the expectation was. Here's where we're at today, and here's where we really want you to be. That sort of thing. But obviously, it's not always that cut and dry. But I would think too, it's kind of best practice to assume the best. There could be something happening outside of work. It could be in this case, like they didn't realize there was a problem, and you just need to have a conversation about it. And I think framing goes a long way too. If you come down on somebody extremely hard, they're probably not going to improve. They're just going to be like, okay, well, it's clear they don't want me here. It's time to just pick up and go. Versus if you say, look, we value your contributions. Here's some things that you've done very well. Here's where we think you could improve, and to be clear, we need you to improve in this area. Don't leave any ambiguity there, I suppose. But yeah, that's a great case study. I know too, you had mentioned that there's some statistics that you had on sort of the talent gap and how things are going in the industry right now. Are there any of those you can share?
Yeah. So one of the things that Devo does is every year we put out surveys and a report that we publish on our website, kind of around mental health of security professionals and the talent gap. So our report from last year, which was published, it was like September 20th, and I only know that because that's my birthday, last year, saying that the talent gap is negatively impacting leadership and the rank and file roles, that 50% of IT security professionals point to continuing staff shortages as a top contributor to their stress. And I think it's really important to point out that when people become so stressed out because they're doing more than their fair share, like what they're supposed to be doing, they're covering for two people in some cases, sometimes more, they get burnt out and they leave. And that contributes to even a bigger talent gap. And we always look at it as like, oh, well, they were a jack or Jill of all trades, and now we have to go hire a person. So then you put out this job description that no one's going to be able to live up to that. And, I think we discussed it before, where like, if you're putting a job description out for someone who's multi-hatted, you're probably not going to find that same set of skills in somebody else. So you have to think about, if I have one person who's doing a million things, that's a million people if that person goes. And it becomes, it can really start to kind of snowball into a mental health and talent gap crisis. A key area of leaders losing teams and having this retention problem is that they're just not investing in that mental health side. So IT security professionals aren't getting the support they need. More than 2 in 5. So I think it was like around like 45% of the sample in our survey said that leadership hadn't responded proactively to the employee burnout, making them want to leave their company and contributing to an even bigger talent gap for them. Managers, about 82% of their staff they're telling their staff that stress and burnout is a normal part of being in the security field. And I don't think that's going to contribute in a positive way to keeping people in their roles. If you as a line manager are saying, oh, get used to it, they're going to leave. There's people nowadays are, especially post-COVID, are like, why am I going to kill myself for this job? I'm miserable, and they're going to leave. And then you have this bigger talent gap problem of roles that you're trying to fill, and you're not able to do it. 83% of IT security professionals admit that they or someone in their department have made errors due to burnout that resulted in a security breach. That's huge. That is going to contribute to probably getting fired from your job. Burnout is being contributed, again, like I said, to not having enough staff on your team, doing multiple people's jobs. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going to rush. So line managers and people managers, whatever you want to call those that are responsible for teams need to do a better job of making sure that they have the right people with the right skill sets in the right roles at the right time. And that comes down to recruiting and getting budget for those roles as well. If you know you need people, companies are cutting, of course. I understand security is always probably always the first to get cut because it's a cost center. I don't agree with that at all. But they look at us as a very expensive cost center. You have to be able to advocate for your teams and hire people and get the talent in that you need. And there are so many different ways that we can do this. And, we discussed it, you've discussed it on other episodes. And we need to be better at advocating for our people and ourselves. Let's fix the multiple crises that are going on at the same time in our field, whether it's burnout, stress, talent gap, new threats, SEC changes. Like, there's a lot going on, I think, at the same time. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you're looking at your hiring practices and, do a better job at it for your own sake.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks right now who, in a perfect world, they'd love to hire another 2 or 3 people for their team. They know that they have gaps. They know that their people are, relatively overworked, that there's just not enough hours in the day to accomplish all the projects and address all the threats that they have. I guess, do you have any advice for those hiring managers and CISOs out there that they'd like to hire more people, they'd like to have more budget for their department, but they're struggling to make that case to the board or whomever to get the budget or the headcount that they need?
Yeah, where I've seen success, not just for myself, but for my peers, has been being able to quantify how security is building trust with your customers, with prospects. There are tools out there that you can use to send like security profiles out to your customers for like renew. They do their annual due diligence or their due diligence upon hiring you as a vendor. Tie that back to dollars. Like, hey, they wanted this. They wanted to make sure this. So, okay, this customer's worth $2 million. So we contributed to this X number of customers times X dollars. Because there are cases now, especially in regulated industries, where they will not choose a vendor. Right? They'll walk away if you don't have security. If they don't think they can trust your brand to protect their data, they will leave. So it is a value add to have a security team, to have a SOC 2, an ISO certificate, FedRAMP, PCI, whatever it might be. Start to tie those to dollars. To $1. We actually have a Slack channel internally here. It's our WinWire. And I've gone through it and be like, hey, I contributed to this and this and this and this. And I can see where my team and I have really gotten involved with customers and prospects and helped to close deals. Showcase it. If you have a great team and you know that your team can add value to, say, a customer's use case or use cases that you're hearing about in your company, write something about it. Give it to your boss or directly to the CEO, whoever that might be, and say, hey, here's an opportunity where we can demonstrate the skills that we have internally to help a customer. Because it all comes down to revenue, especially now with the way the economy is heading. Show how you're contributing and say, hey, if I had an extra 2 people, I could do this. And then make sure you deliver on it, of course, when you get those people and show that that you demonstrate that you were able to meet the needs of your customers faster, right? Get that sales cycle faster. Have questionnaires that are available. I need more people to do that, and advocate for yourself more, and prove that you're not just a cost center, that you are helping the bottom line.
Yeah, that's great, and it seems to be a very common theme in the folks I asked that question. It's we got to somehow tie security to revenue, work with the sales department, work with the marketing department. I think that's really the play. And you encapsulated it there beautifully. It would seem too, if you're looking at justifying hiring 1 or 2 or however many people, that you might even pitch their hiring as, part security outcomes and part contribution to revenue outcomes. Have that plan for that person before they even come on board and have them have a multifaceted role. in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the security evangelist role, you hear a lot of things about it, like, what do they do? What is it? Build it into a role description, right? Like this person can go out in front of customers and almost like a field CISO type role, but not at that caliber of like the hierarchy caliber, and say, hey, this person, we can put them in front of a customer. They are technical enough. They know how to speak to clientele. They have that, tech to business talk down. Like this could be a real opportunity to save a deal that might be, just on the brink of being signed or not, where they could go in front of a customer and really nail it. And that's a great way to do it. Or it frees you up to go and do something like that, which I think is typical for people that are at CISOs, right? We go in front of the high dollar clientele. And if you're able to do more of that and help the bottom line, it's a win-win for everybody. It's just, it's delicate. Always ask for more people than you need. I need 5. Settle for 2. Settle for 1. It's always good to over exaggerate a little bit and then get whatever you can get, because it will always be cut.
That's a great point too. Well, and it sounds like too, you use security almost as a way to build trust with customers, because inherently, if something is more secure, you trust more in that thing or that company or that process. So really leveraging the inherent benefits of trust building through security, I think, is a great way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. Sales needs the security team, because nowadays every company is a data company, whether you like it or not. And you have to be entrusted with sensitive levels of data for some companies, and you have to be able to prove that you can protect it. Or if something happens, that you are going to be as transparent and accountable as you can be. So your incident response needs to be, on point. Well, if you don't have an incident response team, how are you going to do that? So it all can tie directly back into dollars. And that's a big shift for some companies to realize that.
Yeah, and if you haven't built that case or made those connections before, it can be challenging. But I think we've at least given a few tips that'll be helpful for folks. Well, we're coming up on time here, Kayla. So just one last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
That's a really good question. I think that we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to be able to say, like, I need people because my current team is struggling, or there's a gap here that we need to address immediately. Speed up those cycles. Ask the right questions. Have the right job descriptions in place already. Work with your recruiters. That's important, so you can address your immediate need. But then I think it's a line manager's responsibility to make sure they're able to manage the people that they hire, and that they are doing their due diligence as well. So I think there needs to be a shift in the mentality of the hiring managers and that transition to line manager, that you really need to step up into that role and do your job of articulating what you need, when you need it by, and be an active participant in the process.
Yeah, and nobody knows what you need better than you do. So anytime you have a recruiter guessing about what you need, not an ideal situation, but it happens more than you might think. So it's a great place to end. Appreciate your time, Kayla. People want to catch up with you or what you do. What's the best way to do so?
Yeah, my LinkedIn messages are a mess because vendors are just relentless. But I am on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/Kayla Williams1. Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, it's at Kayla_obviously, and I will be at RSA this year. Devo has a booth, so I will be there and out and about around San Francisco.
Excellent. And we will put a link to some of the statistics that you mentioned in the show notes as well. Well, thanks, Kayla, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.